Can you become aware of yourself as the perceiving consciousness, the silent presence behind all sense perception? Without that awareness, there would be no seeing, no hearing, no feeling. There must be something that makes perception possible. That something is consciousness, your consciousness. It doesn't just observe perception from afar, it flows into the senses. In a way, it becomes the perception. Sense perception arises from this consciousness. You would not perceive anything at all if this conscious presence wasn't behind your experience. So the invitation is, become aware of yourself not just as a person experiencing the world, but as the awareness behind that experience, the stillness behind the senses that allows perception to arise. One way to practice this is through listening. Natural sounds are especially helpful. Birds singing, the wind through trees, the sound of waves or flowing water. When you listen, give the sound your attention, but not all of it. Hold a little back. Let part of your attention rest not on what you're hearing, but on the fact that you're hearing. Attention becomes aware of itself. You don't need to be completely absorbed in the sound. Instead, you let a small part of your awareness stay anchored in stillness, observing. You can practice this with anything simple. What you see, what you feel, even what you smell. The gentle breeze may carry the faint scent of flowers or earth. Let yourself become present to that too. Sometimes you may find yourself in a rare moment when all your senses are fully alert. Sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, all active at once. In those moments, behind all that activity, there is still this one awareness. This is your place of rest, your center, the still point within you. You are rooted in being. That's why practicing in quiet settings, like retreats, is so valuable. But the real test comes when you return to everyday life. At home, at work, in the busyness of the world, you continue the practice. It becomes harder. So many things pull at your attention. But slowly, you learn to stay connected. At first, just glimpses, then longer. Eventually, even while acting, you can remain rooted in awareness. And later, even while thinking. That is a crucial step. Most thinking is automatic, unconscious, and often creates problems where none exist. But now your thinking no longer controls you. You can think without losing presence. Thought becomes clearer, calmer, more creative, no longer compulsive or chaotic. Sometimes, when in a deep state of presence, especially with eyes closed, your attention may be almost entirely within. In those moments, there is nothing left of the personal self, only the silent, conscious presence. And strangely, you may feel that perception, seeing, hearing, all of it, is somehow less real than this deep presence. It's like everything outside is skimmed milk, but inside you are the cream, undiluted, full. In the Indian tradition, this deep state of absolute presence is called samadhi. But they also speak of sahaja samadhi, a higher form of presence. Sahaja samadhi means you don't lose presence while interacting with the world. You stay rooted in being, even while acting, speaking, or thinking. This is not withdrawal, it is presence in motion, awareness woven into daily life. And here I'm reminded of a parable from Jesus. He speaks of a man who, Jesus once told a parable about two men who built their houses, one on sand and the other on rock. The first man, he said, built his house on sand. At first all seemed well, but then the floods came. The storms rose, and because the house lacked a strong foundation, it was swept away by the waters. It could not withstand the force of the world. But then there was another man. Jesus described him as someone who hears his words and puts them into practice. Not just someone who listens, but someone who lives the teaching. And the core of that teaching, as Jesus said, is this: seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all else shall be added unto you. The kingdom of heaven, within you, that presence, that stillness, that awareness we've been speaking about. This second man, he digs deep. That's the key phrase. He doesn't just build on the surface. Before he lays the foundation of his house, he digs. He keeps digging until he reaches the rock beneath the earth, and only then does he build. When the storms come and the floods rise, this house stands firm. It is unmoved because it is anchored in something real, something eternal. This story is not just about buildings. It's about consciousness. Jesus was pointing to two states of being. One is superficial, living only on the surface of life, swept this way and that by circumstances, emotions, thoughts. That is the house on sand. The other is rooted, deeply anchored in presence, in stillness, in the vertical dimension of being. That is the house on the rock. To dig deep is to turn inward, to reach that unshakable foundation within you, the presence that is untouched by external chaos. When you are rooted in being, the storms of life may still come. Difficulties, changes, even pain. They still arise, but they no longer define you. They no longer dictate your state of consciousness. You remain steady. This is what all spiritual teachings in their essence are pointing to. The shift from identification with form and circumstance to awareness of being, from reacting to life to resting in the stillness from which life arises. And this is not an abstract ideal. It is a practice, a way of living, a moment-to-moment return to the presence within. To live in this world today and remain present requires something extraordinary. The world we inhabit now, the one shaped by the collective human mind, or more accurately, by a collective unconsciousness, is in many ways deeply chaotic. To stay rooted in presence within such a world is no small task. It's relatively easy to feel present here, in a retreat setting. You've stepped back from the usual noise, from daily demands. You're in a more protected environment. Yes, even here, small challenges may arise, but they pale in comparison to the intensity of the outside world. Out there, the challenges are many, and the world we've created, our civilization, is largely a reflection of unconscious thought, reactive emotion, and ego-driven behavior. But even during the time of Jesus, the world had its own forms of chaos. Different in nature, perhaps fewer in quantity, but still real. What's different today is the sheer constancy of stimulation. The never-ending stream of noise, pressure, opinion, conflict leaves almost no moment of stillness, of simply being. And so once again we return to the words of Jesus. He said, "In the world you will have tribulation." That is the nature of the world. That is what the world does. It creates tribulation. But he adds, "Take heart, I have overcome the world." That's key. He didn't say he had defeated the world. He said he had overcome it, transcended it. He had risen above dependency on it. That is awakening. And then comes something even more surprising, words that many devout followers struggle to explain. Jesus also said, "All the things that I do, you shall do also, and greater things than these shall you do." He wasn't placing himself above us as some unreachable figure. Like the Buddha, Jesus came as a forerunner, someone who points to what is possible, someone who reveals that conscious connection to the source is not reserved for a few saints. It is available to all. Now, of course, I don't know what your personal life situation is. Perhaps you live in a relatively sane environment, at work, at home, or maybe it's the opposite. Perhaps your daily life is filled with unconsciousness, reactivity, conflict, ego battles, emotional volatility, maybe even outright dysfunction. If so, then you already know you must summon an even deeper level of presence to stay centered. In these environments, people around you may be lost in mind identity, ego possession, emotional drama. There may be ongoing arguments, tension, or worse. Hopefully not physical violence, but that too, sadly, is a manifestation of extreme unconsciousness. And yet, if you can stay present in such settings, that presence is not only possible, it becomes powerful. It transforms you. A retreat setting, a peaceful corner of the world, can certainly support presence. But if that's the only place you can access it, your growth is limited. You become like a plant grown in a greenhouse, protected, nourished, but fragile. Put that plant out into the wild, into wind, rain, cold, and it struggles to survive. It has no resilience because it was never challenged. It never had to develop strength. Now imagine you go to a luxurious wellness resort in Hawaii or Bali. Everything is serene. You meditate daily. You eat perfectly. You receive treatments. You swim. You're pampered and protected. And you may believe, this is it. I have arrived. I am present. Perhaps you are. Perhaps in that moment your presence is genuine. But the real test comes later, when life no longer pampers you, when the elements strike, when people trigger you, when uncertainty returns. That's when presence must deepen. That's when your roots must hold. But eventually, even the most serene retreat must come to an end. At some point you'll have to leave because your money runs out. After all, it costs $1,000 a day to stay there. So you return home, and in your mind you believe you're enlightened now, so peaceful, so aware. But then the first real challenge arises, and suddenly you lose it all again. This pattern was once described to me by a Buddhist monk I knew many years ago. He was American, but he had gone to Thailand to live and train in a forest monastery. During his early years as a monk, his teacher gave him permission to go up the mountain, where small meditation huts were set among the trees. There, all he had to do was meditate, alone, all day long. Each day, someone would bring him a simple meal. He had food, silence, solitude, everything needed for deep meditation. And so he meditated for months. In that stillness, he reached states of extraordinary presence, pure, luminous awareness. He felt certain, this is it, I've awakened. But eventually, he had to come down from the mountain. Back at the monastery, someone said to him, your visa has expired. You need to go to Bangkok and apply for a new one. So he traveled to the city and soon found himself standing in a long line at the immigration office. He waited an hour. When he reached the front, the clerk told him, you're in the wrong line. Go over there. He moved to the next line. More waiting, more confusion. Gradually he could feel something within him start to shift, not in a good way. His peace began to crumble. His thoughts became restless. Frustration crept in. And after nearly 3 hours, he was finally ushered into a small office. By then, he was seething. He slammed his hand on the desk and said, I've been here for 3.5 hours, and you still haven't helped me. And in that very moment, he woke up again, not into serenity, but into awareness of his own reactivity. He realized he had lost it, completely. The presence he had experienced on the mountain had not yet become part of him. It was real, but it was still fragile. It wasn't yet embodied. That's when he understood. The real test of presence is not found in stillness or isolation. The world itself is the test. The world is here to challenge you, so that presence can take root inside you and grow strong. When you fall ill, it's a challenge. When you lose something important, it's a challenge. When the people around you are difficult, reactive, unconscious, it's a challenge. And yet these very challenges are your opportunity. They are not barriers to awakening. They are the conditions through which your presence becomes real. Not all of life's challenges come from the outside. They may seem external, arising through people, events, or unexpected circumstances, but in truth, a large part of your challenges originate from within, from your own mind. And in fact, I would suggest that the greater part of life's challenges are not external at all. Yes, difficult situations happen, but far more often it is the unobserved mind, the constant mental narrative, the unchecked thoughts, the inner commentary, that creates suffering. It's the story your mind tells you about your life. The distortions, the misinterpretations, the mental filters. When you look at life through the veil of conditioning, your past, your learned judgments, your automatic patterns, you don't just see what is. You see a mental version of what is. A story layered over reality. And when you can't separate what's actually happening from your interpretation of it, you become trapped in that narrative. You suffer not from the moment itself, but from the mind's resistance to it. But a shift happens the moment you become aware. You stop complaining, stop resisting, and simply see the challenge for what it is. You face it directly. And with each challenge, especially the small ones, you become more awake, more alert. Even something as simple as your flight being canceled. You arrive at the airport. No explanation. 50 angry people around you. You can feel their frustration, their stories about how everything has gone wrong. And you have a choice. Either you get pulled into that collective reactivity, or you use it as a cue to wake up, to be here. It becomes an opportunity for intensified presence. And in that state of presence, you become truly intelligent. Not the kind of intelligence the mind prides itself on, but a deeper intelligence, a higher intelligence. From this space, if an action is required, you take it, but it's not a reaction. It's clear, calm, appropriate action. And if no action is possible in that moment, then you rest and surrender. You don't resist. You don't turn the situation into a problem. You may sit for hours, waiting. You may end up sleeping on a chair. But none of it creates unhappiness anymore. There is stillness. There is awareness. And there is no unhappy person left inside you. Only presence. I've heard accounts from people who were told by their doctor that they had a serious, even terminal condition. At first, as you might expect, the reaction was grief, fear, resistance. This can't be happening. I'm not ready. There's so much more I wanted to do, but my life is incomplete. It shouldn't end now. But for some people, something else awakens in that moment, something deeper. They become intensely present. Not in theory, not as a spiritual idea, but through direct experience, because all future is stripped away. Only the now remains. And in that now, something sacred opens. Some people, after receiving a serious medical diagnosis, simply refuse to leave the present moment. They realized either through exposure to a teaching like this, or sometimes completely intuitively, without any guidance, that the moment they left the now, suffering began. If they even allowed their minds to drift a few months into the future, imagining a time when they might no longer be alive, or their bodies no longer functioning, unhappiness would arise. So they stayed here, completely. And in that surrender to the present moment, something remarkable happened. Not just clarity or alertness, but even a kind of elation, a deep, vibrant aliveness. There was one account a few years ago of a British musician. I've forgotten his name now. He wasn't world famous, but reasonably well known. He was in his 30s or early 40s when doctors told him he had only about a year to live. But his reaction was highly unusual. He described in an interview how he walked out of the doctor's office and immediately, without first going through the typical stages of grief or despair, he experienced a powerful surge of presence. He hadn't read any spiritual books. He hadn't studied mindfulness or meditation. Yet suddenly, there it was, an intense, alive sense of now. And he began to live fully in the present. In the interview, he said something striking. Why didn't I do this before? Why did I wait until now? But what he felt wasn't mere happiness. Happiness is too fleeting, too surface level. What he experienced was something deeper, something beyond the duality of happiness and unhappiness. It was life itself. Not the idea of life, not the drama of life, but the direct experience of being alive. We might call it joy, but even that word doesn't quite fit. It was an intensified sense of aliveness. So what caused this sudden transformation? Why did he, or anyone in such a situation, feel that shift? It's because time was removed. The future was no longer real to him. Without a future, the ego cannot survive. The egoic sense of self is built from the past. It feeds on memory, identity, and it needs the future for its projected fulfillment. The idea of becoming, of arriving, of winning, of being recognized. And ultimately, the ego also faces its destruction in the future, though it doesn't like to acknowledge that. In this man's case, the ego collapsed, not through a spiritual practice, but through the sheer intensity of presence caused by crisis. This kind of awakening has happened to people who've lost everything, in natural disasters or man-made tragedies. Not everyone reacts this way, of course. Many remain stuck in grief, resistance, suffering. But for some, these intense life disruptions become openings, doorways into true spiritual realization. The good news is, you don't need to wait for suffering to find presence. That's why you're here. At some point, the function of suffering, as a wake-up call, has fulfilled its purpose. It may still come, and when it does, it can deepen your presence. But it's no longer necessary. You are now voluntarily inviting presence into your life. And once presence begins to manifest through you, your relationship to challenges changes completely. They no longer trigger the same reactions. In the past, every difficulty might have led to anger, despair, or resistance. You would build a mental narrative around the problem, make it larger than it is, identify with it, and in doing so, you amplified it. You created inner drama around every challenge. Let's return to a simple example. Your flight is canceled. You're at the airport. The announcement is vague. No one knows what's happening. People around you are angry, impatient. Now, if you're caught in unconsciousness, you might storm up to the counter, shout at the airline staff, demand explanations, insist someone fix it immediately. You might say, "This is unacceptable," and feed your frustration with a mental story. But in doing so, you've taken a small inconvenience and turned it into suffering. And what often happens next? The person behind the counter becomes defensive. Their tone escalates. Maybe someone nearby joins the conflict. The situation spirals. Suddenly, the drama has grown. Maybe security is called. Maybe you're removed from the situation. And this cascade began with a simple delay. We see this often, especially on airplanes. People get triggered. The space is tight. Tempers flare. Alcohol lowers awareness. A small discomfort becomes a public disturbance. The plane is forced to land. Someone is taken away. What began as a 2-hour delay ends with arrest and shame. This is a clear example of what happens when unconsciousness meets unconsciousness and escalates. But when you remain present, the same challenge doesn't escalate. It dissipates, almost like a quiet miracle. You don't feed the fire, so it doesn't burn. And very often, when you no longer resist, the situation transforms. Something shifts. A helpful solution arises seemingly out of nowhere, and you find yourself saying, "Oh, that worked out after all."